So on the first page, normally in deciding what the closing date is, you decide how many days you need for the escrow to close on time once the buyer's contingencies have expired. Let's say, for example, you have a vacant land transaction. You think that you can reasonably complete all your due diligence in 45 days. My recommendation is for the buyer to do whatever the buyer wants to do to satisfy the buyer's due diligence. And then once the contingency is expired, close escrow within 15 days. You don't need 30 days. Most of the time you can close within 15 days after the buyer's contingencies have expired. Okay? So in this sense, it's very different from the car form. Car form, we have a definite closing date. This one, we also have a definite closing date, but it is not relative to the date of acceptance, but the closing date is relative to the date of expiration of the buyer's contingencies. So it all depends on how many days of contingencies you give the buyer, okay? Here, you go ahead and input the escrow company here, and then escrow company's address. And then you put the property address here, the city where the property is located, the county, the state. And then you give the street address, and then usually I don't put the legal description because the legal description is actually too long. If I know the APN, usually I put in the APN number here, okay? And of course, I want to put in the title company's name here, whatever the title company name is. And then 2.3 talks about things that have become a fixture to the property. We call that improvement. If there are some things, some improvement that's part of the purchase price, you should include it here. Or you can just leave it blank. If you leave it blank, then the fixture rules would apply. Okay. Purchase price. Put in the purchase price here. And usually when I'm involved in vacant land, I don't want to set the purchase price dollar per acre, or rather just set a fixed lump sum price. Instead of saying dollar per acre, I usually just use I usually just select this. For example, it's $1 million, right? I don't like to have this option because it's confusing. I prefer to just deal with the, flat fee like that, lump sum price. No need to use this unless you have to. The brackets here, no need. And if there's any area that is not included in the calculation, you see, the form said when you check these boxes, you have to deal with this little space here. So usually I just use one flat fee over here. Okay. And then you want to put down the down payment. Amount of new loan is how much money you're borrowing from the bank. Okay. And this one is just like the last form that we talked about. If you want to assume certain existing deed of trust, you can put the assumption here. If you're assuming, let's say, for example, the seller already has a mortgage, you can negotiate with the seller to let you assume the mortgage. Sometimes you may want to assume the mortgage. If you're assuming the mortgage, you fill in the number here. Okay? But if you are not, it says strike if not applicable. So you will basically strike whatever is not applicable. Which this is the strikeout key here. So if you don't need anything here, strike if not applicable. I think we had the same issue in the previous form, so this is nothing new to us. Anything that you do not need, where it says strike if not applicable, you strike it. If it doesn't say strike if not applicable, even if you don't need it, don't strike it. Okay? I don't want to do any striking unless I have to. Okay? Deposit money is just your deposit money. There's nothing much to talk about. And then your financing contingency, if it's all cash, you strike number 5. It says strike if not applicable. If you do not have a loan, you don't need number 5. And if you do not have seller financing, you do not need number 6. Here, this is where you put in the broker's name. You put in the listing agent's name here, and then the selling agent's name here. Okay? This is standard stuff that we went over, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it. Now for vacant land, I just use the default unless there's a reason I don't think the default is practical. Physical inspection, 10 days is good enough. Hazardous substance, sometimes you need 45 days, so you have to talk to the consultant that's going to prepare the environmental report. Now, if you have a vacant land, sometimes if the vacant land might have possible sources of contamination, you probably want to advise your buyer to have environmental report prepared. Okay? And the 30 days may not be enough, so I put 45 days. So soil inspection, if you're buying a hillside property like in San Jose, sometimes you have to dig trenches. You know what's a trench? A trench is it's a long hole that you dig. Why do people dig trenches on the ground? They want to find out if there's any possibility of landslide. You know what a landslide is? If you don't know what a landslide is due to a failure of the slope. You have soils slipping down the slope because the slope has failed due to landslide. Okay? Sometimes landslide can be due to heavy rain, too much moisture on the soils, cause a landslide. So one of the things you want to do when you do soil inspection, you want to check for possibility of landslide if you're buying a hillside property, a vacant land. Okay? You need to know which expert you're going to hire. Typically, you want to hire a geologist. The report might cost you about $3,000 to $4,000. Governmental approval, 30 days is probably enough. Conditions of title. Usually, on AIR forms, the buyer gets to see the title report, and then the buyer gets to say approve or don't approve. Okay? That's what they mean by conditions of title. Survey, if you are a developer, if you are thinking of developing a vacant land, you should actually spend some money and get a survey done. Survey may be another few $1,000s. You know what a survey is? Basically, it's a measurement of, it's a determination of the property lines. So you know where the property lines are. So you know if there's any possible litigation due to encroachment. That's why you do a survey, right? Existing leases and tenant statements, most of the time it does not apply for vacant land, but it doesn't mean that it won't happen. Sometimes there are existing leases on vacant land, okay? And this one talks about existing notes, because some buyers might want to take over existing deed of trust. So they need to study the existing note. So this particular paragraph deals with existing note. Personal property. Buyer has the right to inspect the personal property. Make sure there are no liens against personal property. Most likely not applicable in vacant land. These are the standard provision in AR. Standard provision. Some standard provision like the ones that we discussed before, so I will not go over it. Actually, more standard provision here. Okay, these are all standard provision. Liquidated damages, arbitration clause. Agency disclosure. Now, paragraph 26 allows you to type in whatever additional paragraphs that you want to type in, okay, in case you have any additional paragraphs. And sometimes you only have a few extra paragraphs. You don't need to use an addendum. You just use paragraph 26 and add the additional provision here. So as you can see, this is a very easy form to use. So if you ever have a vacant land deal, I highly recommend you use this form and not the CAR form. It's a better form than CAR form. Do not use CAR form if you have air form. The only time you use CAR form is if you don't have air form. Okay? All right. That's it for the air form for vacant land. Next week we'll talk about the last air form for standard offer. Okay, and that's it for today.